Welcome to the Respect in the Workplace training delivered by LD Human Resources. Today we'll be reviewing overall respect in the workplace, the legislative background related to both workplace harassment, workplace violence, workplace bullying, as well as workplace sexual harassment. We will cover employee and employer obligations and also ensure that everyone understands the complaint and investigation process. We'll end off with the importance of inclusivity in the workplace, which is really ideal to ensure a successful work environment and a positive work culture. So what is respect in the workplace? Essentially, it is defined as the action of treating people with appreciation and dignity. Both employee and employer should treat each other with respect, promoting positive, healthy work environment. This will increase productivity, reduce stress, collaboration, and really improve overall satisfaction, creating a wonderful work environment. So how is it that we can be respectful? Well, we need to recognize everyone is different, empathize, ensure we're listening, connecting with people, be aware, self-monitor your actions, make sure you've got awareness of personal space because that is definitely necessary, and ensuring trust through your actions. Do what you say you're going to do so that you have that trust. Cherish other people's successes and actions, and make sure that everyone is being treated as equal. We want to just be nice is the key word here, right? Be kind, considerate, supportive, honest, and think beyond yourself. However, when we look at, workplaces, there is also awareness of understanding what is the opposite, right? What is a non-respectful workplace and what's workplace harassment? So, discrimination, prejudice, exclusions, there's a lot of different things here in this slide to share with you. But essentially, the Ontario Human Rights Code prohibits discrimination and harassment in the employment, right? Everyone has the right of freedom from harassment in the workplace by the employer or the agent of an employer, another employee, because of race, ancestry, place of origin, color, ethnic origin, citizenship, creed, sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, age of record of offensive, marital status, family status, or disability. Those are really the grounds under the Ontario Human Rights Code. Whereas the Occupational Health and Safety Act says that engaging in a course of vexatious comments or conduct against a worker in a workplace that is known or ought to be reasonably known as unwelcome is what workplace harassment is. So it could be unwelcome words or actions. It could be someone that is really just putting someone down, embarrassing, humiliating, demeaning them. It could be things that are intimidating or isolating an individual or a group of individuals. Here's some examples. So, making remarks, innuendos, intimidating, putting someone down. Gone are the days of the Sunshine Girl posters on the lockers at those garages at the mechanic shops, right? Any kind of display of offensive pictures or material, whether it's print or electronic, is considered harassment. Repeating offensive or intimidating phone calls. A lot of people like to hide behind a screen or emails. Workplace sexual harassment, bullying, those are all examples. So comments or conducts that typically happen more than once are usually more of harassment. It could even just happen one time, and it can be considered harassment. Now, what's not workplace harassment? I mean, if you're getting feedback that is not positive and it's constructive in your work, that's not harassment. That's performance management. That's guidance. That's advice, right? If you have a difference of opinion, everyone comes from different backgrounds and has different experiences. So we need to embrace those. That is not workplace harassment. We agree to disagree, right? And also any kind of reasonable action by an employer or supervisor. For example, as I mentioned, maybe they're on a disciplinary program and we're looking to performance improve. So it can be challenging at times, reassigning work or implementing a specific sort of measure from a health and safety perspective or evaluation, changing sort of some duties. Those are not examples of workplace harassment. Now we look at workplace violence. Well, it could be workplace violence is really specific around physical force against a worker. So it's in a workplace where there's actual injury to the worker, but it could also be an attempt to exercise that physical force, threatening comments or interpreted threats, if you will, or even the actual physical force against a worker in a workplace that could cause physical injury, or it does cause physical injury. That is workplace violence. It's specific around the physical and injury aspect. Now, what are some examples? Well, could be threatening, waving your fist in someone's face, hitting someone, throwing an object. Oftentimes, people get frustrated. They might smash their phone or, throw something. That's intimidating. That's violence. People are not comfortable. So that is workplace violence. And inappropriate, right? Sexual violence, kicking an object or a worker, anything that's going to impact negatively to physically or psychologically negatively impact or damage, and an attempt to exert physical force that could cause that psychological physical harm, that is considered workplace violence. There's another point to workplace violence that incorporates domestic violence. And, under the Occupational Health and Safety Act, if an employer becomes aware or ought to be reasonably aware that domestic violence is exposed in a workplace or could cause physical injury or harm, that they have not protected the worker, that is considered workplace violence. I once had an organization where the receptionist was a victim of domestic violence, and her aggressor was not finished his violence, if you will, in the home, and showed up at the workplace. We quickly put her in out of harm's way and sort of saved her, if you will, and hid her behind locked doors and called the authorities. But that's where it could be scary, right? If someone's not finished, they're bringing that violence to the individual in the workplace and could cause harm on them as well as their colleagues. So very, very important. It is considered a workplace issue. So what's considered workplace sexual harassment? I'm not sure if everyone follows the show. A little funny, just to kind of bring us and lighten it up a little bit, if you will. Some of the examples really are involving unwelcome words or actions, if you will, associated with sex, any kind of sexual orientation or gender comments or actions that, again, are known or ought to be known as offensive, embarrassing, humiliating, or demeaning, either to an individual or a group of workers in a workplace. And it could be something that's, intimidating with them. So some of those examples, asking questions, talking, writing about sexual activities. Listen, everyone has their interests, and perhaps this is a topic for you. No problem for you to discuss these things or have these conversations with your friends, but not at work. It's just not appropriate. Any kind of rough or vulgar humor related to sexuality, sexual orientation, gender, any kind of, like I mentioned, displaying of pornography, offensive sexual jokes, leering, inappropriate staring, invading personal space, any kind of unnecessary physical contact, verbally abusing, making gender-related comments, demanding hugs, threatening to penalize someone if they don't, respond to your sexual advance. I once had a VP that worked with us in HR, and she was such a wonderful woman, but every morning she would come in and look for a hug, and it then became a little bit awkward and uncomfortable. And so we then just developed behaviors. When we heard the door open, we would dodge and go grab a coffee so we would avoid it. And sometimes it can be uncomfortable to address it, because it's maybe, just a matter of perspective. But we did have to say something, say, we love your hugs, but, not every day. We'll let you know when we're comfortable, because that could be considered workplace sexual harassment. And it did stop. And she was very understanding. But in general, what is the test of harassment? I mean, someone can make it clear either from saying to you, I really feel uncomfortable and I'm offended. But most of the time, people don't say anything, but their body language does, their facial expressions do. You need to be able to understand and recognize that they're uncomfortable and it should stop immediately, that behavior. I give you the example of, recognizing being self-aware. I had changed my hair and made it a little lighter. And, I said to my mom, do you like my hair? I just did. And she gave me this really funny face and says, oh yeah, I like it, honey. And she clearly on her face was not liking it. I said, oh, well, mom, your words are saying that, but your face is saying something different. So, facial expressions, body language tell a lot more and say a lot more than words do. So pay attention. Here's a little clip that will highlight some of what we are saying in terms of workplace sexual harassment.
If you're still struggling with consent, just imagine instead of initiating sex, you're making them a cup of tea. You say, hey, would you like a cup of tea? And they go, oh my God, I would love a cup of tea, thank you. Then you know they want a cup of tea. If you say, hey, would you like a cup of tea? And they're like, I'm not really sure. Then you can make them a cup of tea or not, but be aware that they might not drink it. And if they don't drink it, then, and this is the important bit, don't make them drink it. Just because you made it doesn't mean you're entitled to watch them drink it. And if they say, no, thank you, then don't make them tea at all. Just don't make them tea. Don't make them drink tea. Don't get annoyed at them for not wanting tea. They just don't want tea, okay? They might say, yes, please, that's kind of you. And then when the tea arrives, they actually don't want the tea at all. Sure, that's kind of annoying as you've gone to all the effort of making the tea, but they remain under no obligation to drink the tea. They did want tea, now they don't. Some people change their mind in the time it takes to boil the kettle, brew the tea, and add the milk. And it's okay for people to change their mind, and you are still not entitled to watch them drink it. And if they're unconscious, don't make them tea. Unconscious people don't want tea, and they can't answer the question, do you want tea? Because they're unconscious. Okay, maybe they were conscious when you asked them if they wanted tea, and they said yes, but in the time it took you to boil the kettle or brew the tea and add the milk, they are now unconscious. You should just put the tea down, make sure the unconscious person is safe, and this is the important part again, don't make them drink the tea. They said yes then, sure, but unconscious people don't want tea. If someone said yes to tea, started drinking it, and then passed out before they'd finished it, don't keep on pouring it down their throat. Take the tea away. Make sure they are safe, because unconscious people don't want tea. Trust me on this. If someone said yes to tea around your house last Saturday, that doesn't mean they want you to make them tea all the time. They don't want you to come around to their place unexpectedly and make them tea and force them to drink it, going, but you wanted tea last week, or to wake up to find you pouring tea down their throat, going, but you wanted tea last night. If you can understand how completely ludicrous it is to force people to have tea when they don't want tea, and you are able to understand when people don't want tea, then how hard is it to understand when it comes to sex? Whether it's tea or sex, consent is everything. And on that note, I'm going to make myself a cup of tea.
Being on a movie set is being like on a ship at sea in a storm. You want the captain to know their ship. It's an important principle. If you don't know the answer, pretend you do. I've been directing films for almost 4 decades.
So what did everyone think about that video clip? Sorry about the technical switch up there. I think it was a very good clip to indicate how it's clear, that we need to respond according to the audience and, what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. It just kind of lightens it up, right? So, on that note, when we talk about workplace sexual harassment, that's also kind of falls along with workplace bullying, right? Here, it could be something that is really deliberate, repeated mistreatment of a targeted employee. This used to be something that was very common back in the day where, they used to have the dunce hat, for example, for the student that wasn't the brightest in the classroom. Well, that is complete bullying right now. And, even, this little joke, bullying victim of the month, right? It's really something that is a subcategory, if you will, of workplace harassment. So, it's seen as either acts or it could be verbal comments, something that emails or texts, something that's going to physically hurt someone on a mental capacity, right? Negative physical contact, of course, as well, but it's really the psychological aspect that is the most detrimental when it comes to bullying. So repeated incidences or one time, that's really something that is aggressive, intimidating, offending, degrading an individual or a group of individuals. Here's another clip to help us understand this aspect.
Workplace bullying is any repeated and unreasonable behavior directed at a worker or group of workers. Okay, wise guy. Well, here's something less obvious. While workplace bullying includes the kind of behavior we typically associate with bullying,
Good morning, fellow co-worker. Get out of my face, loser.
it also includes other more subtle forms of unreasonable behavior, like this, this,
Let's all go out for lunch today, but don't tell you know who.
and this.
This job you've given me seems pointless and it isn't part of my job. Yeah, but what are you going to do about it?
And even though they're being a total jerk, it's kind of a good question. What are you going to do about it? Well, you could start by checking your work's policy on bullying. You might like to talk to someone you trust, maybe a friend.
I had a similar thing happen to me once. Yeah, it was crap.
Or a manager, a supervisor, or HR.
Just how awful this must be for you. Now that I know, we can nip this in the bud.
Or maybe even the person who's giving you a hard time.
Excuse me, this is not okay and it has to stop.
Or if all that doesn't work,
I said, get out of my face, loser.
you might like to consider taking it further.
Hello, Inspector? I need to speak to someone about bullying.
Because here's something else that might not be obvious. You never have to tolerate that crap, and you deserve better. Obviously.
So, I mean, we don't have an inspector, if you will, all the time, but there's definitely different types of individuals who we can report incidences to, whether it's HR, your manager, the owner of the company, an office manager. And we'll get into reporting in just a moment. But workplace bullying comes in various forms. It could be verbal, attack, someone calling someone names. It could be, in a social or relationship sort of environment where someone's spreading rumors, gossiping, exclusion. That is a big one, right? Oh, I'm going to go for lunch, but I'm going to invite everybody but Sarah, for example. Like this is so unkind and hurtful. And then there's cyberbullying, which is a very dominant sort of form of workplace bullying through electronic media, whether it's an aggressive email with cap locks and inappropriate language and, or embarrassing someone, intimidating someone damaging really their reputation, threatening someone. Those are examples of the different forms, if you will. There are also other examples. Is it something that, we're just having a joke and then it kind of goes too far? Well, you need to be aware. So, when we're talking about sort of the line, that fine line, it could be, again, social exclusion, silent treatment. I once worked in an environment where I had to be the bearer of bad news for an individual's performance on a committee because I chaired that committee. And so she got really offended and gave me the silent treatment probably for a good 3-4 months every morning. Every day I would go in and say, good morning. And she just gave me the dirtiest look and didn't acknowledge me. That could be considered workplace bullying. Now, me in my position as HR manager at the time, I tried not to let it affect me. I did not report it. I really just kind of killed her with kindness. And eventually she came around and we became friends. But those things can be considered bullying, and it's important to address them as early as you can so that it stops. You don't want to intrude on someone's privacy by spying or stalking them, obviously yelling, using vulgar language, profanity, like we're not saying for you to change who you are. Depending on the industry, sometimes it's very common for people to swear. Well, as long as you're not putting someone down and they're okay with it, then don't change who you are. But I used to work with someone who worked at this company. She was the first employee, and we were in a meeting. It was about a collection of a client invoice, and the boss, was very upset at the situation and started kind of throwing the F-bomb around here and there. It didn't bother me because I figured, well, he's upset at the situation. It's too bad that, this client isn't paying. But I did immediately recognize that the individual employee who was in that meeting as well, the first employee of the company, as I mentioned, she right away stiffened up. Her body language, her facial expressions completely changed. She was quiet and very uncomfortable. So as soon as he left the room, I said, hey, are you okay? I noticed that you were a little bit uncomfortable. And she said to me, I hate it when they swear. I always tell them, and, I'm just sick of saying anything anymore. But it's been a while since she had said something and she didn't want to bother. Well, that could be workplace bullying, right? I did go back to the boss, if you will, and said, hey, I don't know if you noticed, but why do you want to make her feel like that? She's uncomfortable. If you need to swear, I don't mind. Just come in my office and let it all out. And then we can go back and talk with a little bit more level-minded, level head. And, at the end of the day, it's about being respectful to your peers and having that professional conduct in the workplace. So, we want to try and eliminate that and be, better articulate our words and thoughts, if you will. Any kind of unwarranted or undeserved punishment, or, again, gone are the days of trying to kind of trick someone and then they don't have any shoes or their uniform is missing, right? So you don't want to kind of take that joke too far, if you will, work equipment, things like that. And someone who's kind of attacking someone's private life is also inappropriate. It could be something that's obvious. It could be something that's subtle. A lot of the times, it's more of a pattern, but it could be one-time event. And I'm not sure if you've heard of the example of or the concept of microaggressions. Those microaggressions could be very subtle, right? Finding fault, or putting in a very kind of subtle comment that's inappropriate, or over monitoring work. And again, making those jokes that are obviously inappropriate and undermining or upsetting or demeaning, they're absolutely not acceptable. And they are examples of workplace bullying. So let's test our knowledge. True or false? Posting these messages on Facebook can be perceived as a form of bullying. Oh my God, what a crappy day at work. Those new employees are completely useless. That is definitely workplace bullying, okay? Same with this one here. Awesome day today. Didn't have to work with any of the new employees, so I actually got some things done. That's still considered a form of bullying, right? You're putting down, whether it's electronic, verbal, it's perceived as offending someone. So how do we prevent this? Well, in general, again, just be nice, right? Be polite, be respectful to all of your coworkers, your customers, clients, contractors, and listen and respond calmly in all of your discussions that you have. Sometimes you get really, really frustrated. I always tell this to my kids, just walk away and let them know that you'll be back, because it's better to take that moment, take that breath, and kind of calm down so you have a level head to have that conversation. So really steering your anger away from you and making sure that you're following those procedures. and encourage someone who's angry or irate, if you will, escalate it, right? Okay, I'm sorry you feel that way. I'm happy to get a supervisor for you. Or I'm sorry that you feel that way. Maybe we should go and talk to the boss about this together, right? In general, you don't want to trade insults. Don't react to rage. Don't fight fire with fire. It just sort of blows up, if you will. Try not to take complaints personally. We sometimes, interpret the message just because it's hard to hear constructive feedback. And it's also sometimes in how people deliver are not the best way in terms of the tone or delivery of the message, but try not to take it personally and put yourself aside. Take yourself we used to do that in my daughter's soccer, is, that 24-hour rule. So take that time to, let that feedback or that inappropriate sort of action that you experienced resonate before you respond. Obviously, try not to stop or hold anyone if they're, just let them go, and definitely not fighting. Fighting is not the answer of any kind of physical force or, verbal fighting as well. We can really hurt people with our words sometimes. So what are the responsibilities? Essentially, we all are responsible. It's everyone's business. So from an employee perspective, you want to make sure that you're conducting yourself in a way that's not violent or harassing. If you see someone being harassed, you really should speak up. There's that whole thing. If you're not stopping it, you're contributing it. And you want to make sure that you're maintaining a professional behavior and demeanor at all times. So, being attentive and attending these training sessions, making sure you're staying up to date, being, respectful and open-minded to diverse perspectives, and making sure you're reporting incidences of violence or harassment immediately. If you see something, as I mentioned, make sure that you're either, stopping it or inquiring. We have a duty to inquire. Here it says perception plays a really big role. And I'll give you that example. We were at work one day, and I heard two people talking at the water cooler, if you will, it's water cooler. And, they were going back and forth, and it seemed like a really intense situation of somebody who was arguing. And they were really kind of going back and forth, and I couldn't ignore it, especially being in my role. And I said, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but is this something that's, happened here? Like, is someone having these types of conversations and arguments and sort of aggression towards one another? And it ended up being that they were just talking about a show that they watched. So, sometimes it's not necessarily all what it seems. So it's best to ask and just ensure that there's no issues there. And, obviously making sure that you're cooperative in any kind of process, whether it's that you're being interviewed or getting your perspective in an investigation, or perhaps it's more serious and they've had to call authorities. And on the flip side, what are the employer responsibilities? We are, as employers, expected and responsible to be an employer that has equal opportunity employment, that we're diverse and we're fostering that inclusivity in the environment. Research suggests that lack of diversity and inclusion in the workplace really does promote a discriminatory environment, and more likely that there's going to be workplace harassment in that type of environment. So we want to make sure that we're having a demographic and backgrounds where people are feeling inclusive. And the other piece of it, when people are feeling maybe isolated, maybe vulnerable or pressured, those types of nonverbal cues are ones that we should be inquiring. So we want to make sure that we're taking all those concerns seriously, addressing any kind of observations that we have to prevent any kind of workplace violence and harassment. And again, practicing that diversity, there's zero tolerance. We want to make sure that we're training on onboarding, educating everybody, and contacting HR or the owner, and making sure that we have taken the appropriate disciplinary action as an employer as soon as possible. So let's test some of our knowledge again. Okay, so true or false? Violence in the workplace must include physical contact, such as beating up someone, to qualify. false. It can definitely be a threat, someone that's been psychologically impacted in a negative way because of a very sort of vicious and aggressive, demeaning comment from someone. That could be violence, something that's going to be threatening or it's going to cause physical or psychological harm on someone. Number two, a violent act can range from excuse me, physical threats, verbal threats, or intimidation to assault and battery. Absolutely true. Number three, if you observe harassment taking place in the workplace, it's best to let the people involved deal with it in between themselves. Absolutely not. You don't have to get in and stop the fight, but definitely try to stop it and report it as soon as possible. Simple jokes, taunting and teasing are not considered bullying, even if they embarrass the other employee. False. I mean, it is definitely something that is considered harassment. Plagiarizing, copying, stealing from a coworker is considered workplace bullying. Absolutely. You are undermining your, basically taking on their identity, and you're intimidating that individual. So those are all examples of workplace harassment. So as I mentioned to you in that example, right? Why do people hesitate to report? So I had a client, a coworker once that, as I mentioned, she was afraid to report because she was concerned for the individual. Some people, because he had a family, some people are afraid they're going to lose their job. If they say something, well, then, maybe they won't get the challenging work, or maybe they will experience performance issues, or they'll lose their job in general, right? Fear of retaliation. So a lot of the times this is a big one, right? People don't want to be bothered because they know that that person's going to make their life a living hell. Well, it's also not appropriate, and they're probably making everybody else's life a living hell as well, right? And when it comes to reprisal, no employee may be disciplined for bringing a complaint forward in good faith. There's nothing that someone should be disciplined for participating in an investigation in good faith. Okay, so they're also afraid that it might disrupt the workplace, that they're going to be accused of sort of not having a sense of humor or being embarrassed, or, that no one's going to believe them, that, because as I mentioned, those microaggressions and discrimination sometimes can be subtle, very inconspicuous. Sometimes it's within policies that we're looking at ensuring equality within practices that, are outdated, if you will. And I think part of that is just making sure that, we acknowledge where there's gaps, and we're recognizing and making every effort to improve. But so important to report because if you don't, that behavior could really affect someone else. And more importantly, you're continuing to have that behavior inflicted and cause pain and harm upon yourself. So if there is a complaint that comes forward, what is the investigation process? This is our friend here, Inspector Gadget, pulling out all his tools out of his toolkit. And so what do we do if we're being harassed? Well, make sure that you're asking the person to stop and let them know the behavior is unwelcome. I had a complaint come in one day where an individual felt that she was being discriminated against because of her race, and that the other ladies in the office were excluding her, and they were laughing at her. They wouldn't sit with her at the table. And I said to her, that's really sad to hear. And knowing the workplace culture and these individuals that she was discussing, because she was new in the organization, I thought to myself, this is really out of character. I'm finding it hard to believe that they would want to treat her like that. But hey, if that's how she's feeling, it's so important that that stops. So I had asked her, what is it? Give me some examples. So she says, well, I went into the printer and they took the piece of paper and looked at me and started laughing, and then they walked away. So I said, well, did you ask her why they were laughing? Did you have a conversation and tell them how you felt to see what they said? And she said, no, I didn't. I don't want to talk to them. She was so upset. So, Next step is that I was going to pursue the investigation and, let the individual know that there was a complaint against them. So I had let the complainant know that, as a next step, I will be addressing this with the aggressor, if you will. And not even a day went by. I was to go in the next day to speak to her, and she sent me an email that night saying, don't worry about it. I ended up speaking to her, and it was a complete misunderstanding. And they, this piece of paper was something else they were laughing at. They thought that I didn't want to sit with them. So, it's all a matter of perception. And sometimes having those conversations really smooths things over and brings everyone back in alignment and on the same page, right? And, if someone doesn't know that they've acted a certain way, you can ask them to stop and they will stop. I always say it's best to deal direct. It's like the person who's honking at you in the underground parking lot. At the end of the day, they're going to be parking beside you and going to their condo in your building every day. And you're going to see that person. So it's best to try and deal with it directly if it's not too extreme or severe, that you feel comfortable with that. And talking to someone to bounce off how to navigate through that before you do that is okay as well. Someone like HR or whatnot, or manager, but really asking the person to stop or letting them know, hey, you kind of crossed that line and I didn't feel comfortable. Can you try a different way next time? I really didn't feel comfortable with that. That's the first step. Now, second step, if that doesn't work, you want to make sure you're keeping a record of things that are taking place, right? Names of witnesses, what happened, when, and then of course, make sure you're reporting the harassment as per your policy to the supervisor. And if it is the supervisor, then you want to go to the management or human resources, and hopefully your concerns are addressed as soon as possible. The best course of action, of course, is not to retaliate, right? Best course of action is to make sure that you're dealing directly. And then if you need to escalate a formal complaint. But, if you retaliate and respond to that negative experience, you could be the one considered the perpetrator. We once had an organization that had a physical fight. Someone had done something inappropriate and that individual didn't like it and literally punched the guy's jaw out. And so even though he was the victim because of this inappropriate ongoing behavior, he kind of lost his cool. At the end of the day, that's workplace violence, and he ended up being the perpetrator as well. So they were both exited. So we don't want to cause this confusion. Make sure you're reporting as soon as possible. Okay. And sometimes it's not necessarily how many, or the character of the incident. It could be how many times, the frequency, what the pattern of the harassment or the bullying is. So making sure we're keeping record of those pieces is important. And then in the complaint process, well, there are two routes. There is formal and informal. Informally, as I mentioned, talk to the person directly, let them know that it's unwelcome, unwanted, and ask them to stop. And then, ask HR sometimes maybe to be that intermediary if you don't feel comfortable together. And then, closing off and reporting the results and checking and making sure that that's maintained as feeling comfortable, everyone. Okay. That's like that first example that I gave you. And then the second formal approach is really that, you've exhausted the effort of the informal, it's still going on, it's not working, or maybe there's something that's severe that you really don't feel comfortable, and we're escalating right away to HR or to the individual noted in your policy. And really, it's in writing, okay? And within 20 days, we're going to respond to that complaint and make sure that we've started the investigation process. We have to inform both parties of the complaint and the results of the investigation. There is also an appeal process. So if the individual complainant doesn't feel comfortable with the results, well, they may make an appeal under the formal allegation of misconduct within 10 days of the decision. And so it can be either the complainant or the respondent saying, I don't agree with the results of this, I want to appeal it, has to be in writing, and the basis for the request must be stated, like, why do you think so? Then we would forward that document documentation to third-party counsel if applicable, or have another investigation with non-biased opinions, if you will, conducted, in a non-biased fashion within 10 days of the written request being received. And essentially, either the request might be declined because there's not enough justification for the appeal, or we could accept it and notify the writing in writing to both parties involved in the decision. And then the review within the 15 days of the notification, that third party counsel, or perhaps it's HR, will communicate those findings, and they would be final with respect to options within the organization. And then lastly, I wanted to touch on, well, more importantly, how to make sure that we're creating a respectful workplace environment. I mean, communication is so important. Oftentimes, the lines that get crossed, it's a misunderstanding or just a matter of perspective. Everyone's got a different approach or different style. And so you want to make sure you're tailoring your approach. And not only from a verbal perspective, but a nonverbal perspective, right? As I mentioned, or here it says, nonverbal is 65%. So think of how much you're losing sometimes on a Zoom call. You don't see someone's body language if they stiffen up. You can't really tell the details of their facial expressions all the time, or the movement of their eye contact or whatnot. Voice inflections, you should be able to still tell. But, being attentive to what's going on besides the words is really important to respond, so that you can retract and make sure you're addressing, oh, I'm sorry if I've offended you, I didn't mean to, so that you can smooth things over. Because sometimes, again, it's just a matter of one person might be comfortable and someone else is not. So communication is really huge in terms of the impact in our daily interaction. And, without having respect or civility, if you will, it's really at the root of violence and harassment and bullying issues within the workplace. So remember the examples of, nonverbal bullying can be like eye rolling, facial expressions, or, suggestive gesturing or winking or leering, right? So everyone's got a different perspective, and making sure that our communications impact our everyday interactions in a positive way is so important, right? You want to think, how is that person going to receive the message? One person may receive or perceive something very different than someone else. So let's test our knowledge. True or false? Only a member of management has the power to eliminate discrimination, workplace harassment, and sexual harassment in the workplace. Absolutely false. Workplace violence and harassment, sexual harassment, discrimination, it's everyone's business. We need to all ensure that we're being respectful and inclusive and promoting a diverse and a very supportive environment in our workplace. So in terms of next steps, we will be sending out a assessment to ensure that you understand and that you understand the content. And if there's any questions as you go through it, please feel free to reach out. There is my contact information. And once you're completed successfully and pass the assessment, you will receive a certificate of completion. Thank you so much for your attendance and participation today, and hope you have a wonderful rest of the day full of positive communication in a wonderful, respectful workplace environment. Have a wonderful day.